Well, good morning or good afternoon or good evening from wherever in the world you may be joining us today. My name is Jeroen de Wolf. I'm the director of the UC Berkeley Institute of European Studies, and I would like to welcome all of you to today's lecture that is organized in cooperation with our Irish Studies program as well as the Center for British Studies. It's my pleasure to welcome to this event also my dear colleague Catherine Flynn, Director of Berkeley's Irish Studies program, who will assist me as co-moderator. Today's event is dedicated to Northern Ireland and is connected with our most recent partner university at the Institute of European Studies, namely Queen's University Belfast. In the context of the partnership, Professor Maruška Švašek visited our campus, and we took advantage of her visit to invite Professor Švašek for a public lecture on Northern Ireland, which she kindly accepted. Let me say a few words about today's speaker. Maruška Švašek has a PhD in anthropology from Amsterdam University in the Netherlands, and currently she is a professor of anthropology and also a fellow of the Senator George J. Mitchell Institute for Global Peace, Security and Justice at Queen's University Belfast. Her two most recent book publications are Ethnographies of Movement, Sociality and Space, Placemaking in New Northern Ireland, and Creativity in Transition, Politics and Aesthetics of Cultural Production Across the Globe from 2016. Professor Švašek prepared for us today a lecture entitled Northern Ireland Beyond the Two Communities Paradigm. This lecture will take about 30 to 40 minutes, and it will be followed by a Q&A. During the presentation, all of you on Zoom are invited to post your questions in the chat, and then Professor Flynn and I will be happy to pass on some of your questions to our speaker during the Q&A session after the lecture. For now, please relax and enjoy the presentation that Professor Švašek prepared for us. Maruška, the floor is yours.
So thank you so much, Jeroen, for the kind introduction, and also everybody here at the Institute for the invitation to give a lecture. So I'm very happy to share my thoughts, and this, as all work, it's always work in progress. So I very much also welcome any comments and critique that you might have. 62-year-old Lily lives in a small town in Northern Ireland. I've known her for several years. When I met her 6 weeks ago, she was close to tears because one of her best friends, Niamh, a Catholic woman in her 60s, was terminally ill and had been taken to the hospital. Lily had hoped to visit her and had organized a rota system with 4 other Catholic women who all belonged to the same friendship group. They had planned to take turns, supporting Niamh as best as they could. Sadly, Lily had just heard that the doctors no longer allowed visitors. 2 weeks later, I saw Lily again, and this time she was devastated. The night before, Niamh had passed away. At moments like this, she said, "My friends are extremely important. We'll go to the funeral mass together, and we'll be united in grieving for someone we love." You might wonder why I started with such an intimate story. The point is that Lily is not a Catholic like her friends, but a Protestant. This might surprise readers of books that emphasize histories of conflict in Northern Ireland and highlight the territorial division between 2 ethno-religious groups, Catholics and Protestants. These maps of Northern Ireland and Belfast illustrate this spatial division. So Lily, while not religiously observant, identified as Protestant. She also regarded herself as British and had not supported the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, which she described as, I quote, allowing IRA terrorists to share governmental power. In 2016, she voted for Brexit, her main aim being to strengthen the border between Britain and the Republic of Ireland. None of these facts, however, reveal the complex psychological and spatial dynamics of intersecting, at times conflicting attachments that made her love both Britain and her Catholic friends. The aim of my talk is partially based on this edited. Wait, something went wrong. Sorry. So the aim of my talk, partially based on this edited volume, is to challenge widespread images of Northern Ireland as either a conflict-ridden or a post-conflict society. Images that have dominated both academic writing and media reportage. So you see some examples of books. Does this take a while? Yeah. So clearly focusing on violent conflict, on sectarian identity and visual symbolism, on peace building, and peace building from a comparative perspective. So I will argue that these kind of studies that foreground the analysis of sectarian tensions between unionist stroke loyalist Protestants and nationalist stroke Republican Catholics, while offering, of course, valuable insights, overemphasize ethno-religious and national contestations and reinforce a problematic two-community paradigm. So the paradigm is problematic for two reasons. First, it overlooks the more diverse processes of attachment, identification, and placemaking that individual members of these groups are involved in. Second, it sidelines the voices of other inhabitants of the region, including non-sectarian locals, migrants, refugees, and people of different religious and ideological persuasions. As such, it limits insights into the histories, spatial practices, and embodied experiences of individuals and groups in the region, and into the nature of conflict as such. So Lily's story is telling. She grew up in a Protestant estate in a small majority Protestant town. She remembered that my school was opposite the housing estate we lived in. All the children went to that school, so I didn't even know I was a Protestant. It was a very orange estate with flags and Union Jacks. This is just a typical example here. She only first heard the word Catholic when she was 7 years old. I was not aware of Catholics until I raided an orchard with my two older brothers. The orchard happened to belong to the priest. My father, who was a plumber and worked for everybody and was friendly with everybody, passed by and saw us. When he discovered the apples in my brother's jumper, he took us to the priest and made us apologize. They joked that it was a terrible crime, so we were really scared. When we returned home, I asked my mom, "What is a priest?" So now at first sight, it seems that the two community paradigm fits, especially as Lily herself used the term community on several occasions. For example, saying that there was a Catholic school on the outskirts, but I was not curious. We did not hate Catholics, but I just felt that we were the community. Melinda Milligan used the term place attachment to refer to such dynamics, defining it as an emotional link formed by an individual to a physical site that has been given meaning through interaction. Lily's account shows that the two community discourse has strongly influenced the dominant social imaginaries in Northern Irish society. I'm referring here, of course, to Charles Taylor's definition of social imaginaries as, quote, the ways in which people imagine their social existence, how they fit together with others, how things go on between them and their fellows, the expectations that are normally met, and the deeper normative notions and images that underlie these expectations. So Lily's sense of belonging to one of two communities was reinforced through the family's involvement in the Orange Order, which employs visual symbols and territorial rituals to celebrate Protestant culture and claim the neighborhood as traditionally loyalist. Like other families on the estate, she explained, we were very active in the Orange Order. My father was an Orange man and used to parade on the 12th. One of my brothers also joined and played in the band. Now the 12th refers to, probably you all know that, but it refers to the 12th of July, which is a commemoration of the Battle of the Boyne, which took place in 1690. This was a battle between Dutch Protestant William of Orange and his uncle, the Catholic James II. Now, William of Orange was crowned the monarch of England, Scotland, and Ireland. And James, supported by France, tried to regain the throne. So their armies met at the river Boyne. And in 4 hours, James was forced out to retreat. So this was really a Protestant victory, and of course, highly symbolic in ongoing political developments in Northern Ireland. So Lily's eyes lit up when I asked her about her childhood experience of the 12. It gave me a sense of pride, she explained. Hearing the music just filled me with happiness. It was a big thing when I was a child. My mum would decorate the house with orange lilies. I would see my dad getting ready, putting his bowler hat on and his white gloves. He looked amazing. Then we'd take buses to Belfast, have a picnic, see lines and lines of bands. It was like carnival. The banners, the sound of drums, the pipe bands, the Kick the Pope bands. Her words show that community attachment can be deeply felt and thus be very real for those who feel part of it. But she also noted, being a girl, I had to help my mom prepare sandwiches, while what I really wanted was to join the parade. It made me jealous and angry. My other brother was not interested, and my parents did not force him to join the parade. He ended up moving to Scotland and marrying a Welsh Catholic. So Lily's envy and the difference between the two brothers' life trajectories show that the notion of community is problematic from an ethic perspective. First, it wrongly assumes that certain groups of people are bounded units whose members all share the same outlook. As Dominic Bryan has convincingly argued, this approach ignores internal hierarchies, tensions, and also conflicting, intersecting allegiances within these groups. It is clear from Lily's story that there were indeed tensions within the estate, in particular with regard to views about paramilitary activities. My brother, she said, the one who was in the band, was very orange. At one point, recruiters from the Woodville Defence Force came over from Belfast to our town to recruit. Thank you. They gathered on the cricket pitch, and my brother stood in a line waiting to sign up. A friend of my father who had seen him warned my dad, who rushed to the pitch, took my brother by the scruff of his neck and ordered him to take his name off the list. No way you're joining a military group, he said. So clearly not all people living on the estate supported paramilitary violence. Conceptualized as a multidimensional process of discursive construction and placed performative practice and embodied experience, community identities often intersect with numerous other identities and desires, and create pathways that can lead to a new sense of multiple self. As a teenager, Lily spent time working outside of Northern Ireland and befriended a Catholic from the Falls Road in Belfast. This opened her eyes, she said, to their commonality as people from the same region. So this again implies that the binary community approach, with its focus on territoriality as opposed to a diversity of placemaking processes, is problematic. It overlooks the fact that people may at certain times and places identify themselves of this or that community, but at other times and places emphasize different connections created through alternative shared activities and interests. When I spoke with her last month, Lily said she felt close to her Catholic friends because of years of shared experience as volunteers in a large organization that supports vulnerable people from all different backgrounds. During numerous trips and meetings, both in Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, they had bonded not only over their shared wish to do good, but also as they chatted about personal matters. Tim Ingold has used the terms pathway and meshwork to explore how individual people's trajectories interweave with those of relevant others. In his theoretical perspective, and I quote, "The lines of the meshwork are the paths along which life is lived. And it is in the binding together of these lines, not in the connecting of points, that the mesh is constituted." Lily's trajectory was, of course, also still interwoven with her Protestant background. And tellingly, her body tensed up during the interview when she recalled a discussion during one of the training sessions in Dublin, when Catholic volunteers objected to the use of English-sounding voices in the training videos. And some of them also wanted the Northern Irish branch to split off the British organization and create an all-Ireland one with its headquarters in Dublin. Lily said that during such moments, she did not identify with her Catholic friends at all and felt very British and realized that her views were strongly shaped by her Protestant background. Protestant, however, needs further unpacking. As a child, Lily had always found it strange that her father, when playing Orange songs on the gramophone, turned the volume up to the maximum. Really loud, she said, as if he were emphatically proclaiming, "I am a die-hard Protestant." She then recalled the following. When I was about 10 or 11, I was secretly searching for Christmas presents and looked in my dad's wardrobe. I was surprised when I found pictures of people unknown to me, playing tennis and wearing long robes. And then when I found a picture of the Virgin Mary and a string of beads. I guess they belonged to my dad's family, but I never asked him. He was a quiet man. So in 2020, she told Niamh that she suspected her father had been of partial Catholic descent. With the help of a family tree specialist, she soon found out that her paternal grandmother had indeed been a Catholic, who had married a Presbyterian. Her father had been raised as a Protestant and had never disclosed the secret to his children. Excited about her findings, Lily traced and contacted several Catholic relatives in Dublin and Derry and arranged to meet them. Keen to make sure that they were not offended, she disclosed that she had recently joined a Women's Orange Lodge to fulfill her childhood dream of parading on the 12th. She explained that she had not joined the lodge to make a political statement, but simply because parading was a tradition she cherished. When they replied that they did not mind a bit, she was relieved. They're even-handed about everything, she told me. You can say that they're the equivalent of what we are, not at all die-hard radicals. This perception of shared even-handedness solidified their sense of kingship across ethno-religious difference. Large-scale surveys and censuses, analyzed in a recent book by Coulter and his colleagues, also reflect the complexity of multi-layered identity formation in Northern Ireland. So this table shows that over the past 20 years, there has been a steady decline in religious observance, and that younger people, especially Protestants, are now less likely to identify as religious. The next table shows here that while many Catholics identify as Irish and many Protestants identify as British, there's also a considerable number of Catholics and Protestants who claim dual Irish and British identities. Tellingly, not all Catholics support Irish unification, and not all Protestants are against Irish unification. So that is here. And interestingly, also those who do not identify as Catholics or Protestants do not all share the same attitude towards Irish unification. So all this diversity shows again that the binary two-community model clearly does not reflect this diversity. The next table compares attitudes in 2007, 2012, and 2019, and also undermines the image of a binary Northern Ireland. You can see that an increase in Catholic, Irish, and Protestant British identities occurs. And this is, of course, a polarization that is very likely linked to, on the one hand, the 2012 flag protests, and on the other hand, to the Brexit vote in 2016. So if you're not aware about the flag protests, in December 2012, Belfast City Council voted to limit the days that the Union flag would be flown from Belfast City Hall which you can see on the right-hand side. This is actually the 8th anniversary of the flag protest, but you see the building behind it. So on top, there was all throughout the year, the Union Jack was flown there. So that was then ended, and this as a response, Ulster loyalists held lots of street protests throughout Northern Ireland. That also led to riots and clashes with the police. So let's then go to the Brexit vote. During the Brexit vote in 2016, most Catholics voted to remain, and most Protestants supported Brexit. So you can see that from the map of Northern Ireland. And if you remember where most Catholics, most Protestants live, so that's very clear from there. And the Protestants then, many of them sided with the Democratic Unionist Party and pro-Brexit conservatives in London. So if you look again at this table, you also see a category other. Now, most likely other includes a growing group of people who have started identifying themselves not as British or Irish, but as Northern Irish. In the 2011 census, 21% of respondents identified as such. Importantly, this group should not be conceptualized as a third community, because as Coulter and colleagues argue, a closer analysis shows that, quote, Northern Irish is not a catch-all identity, but serves a slightly different purpose and has a different meaning for those from different backgrounds. For Catholics of all ages, it may be an effort to be neutral on the constitutional question. For Protestants, particularly of a younger generation, it is a useful alternative to British identity. For neither Catholics nor Protestants does Northern Irish simply mean both British and Irish. When I asked Lily whether she identified as Northern Irish, she said she did not. And she proclaimed, I'm British. I don't care about religion, but I live in this part of the UK, so I am entitled to be British. Britain includes Scotland, Wales, English, and Northern Ireland. This is also why I object to the Northern Irish Protocol. She referred here to the disputed Brexit deal that since 2020 has required checks on goods coming into Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK, while allowing free trade between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So loyalists in particular have demonstrated against the emerged sea border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, arguing that it plays into the hands of those supporting Irish unification. And the DUP First Minister resigned, so the executive collapsed over this issue. So here you see people protesting against this border, which is a very topical issue, because in 2 days we will know, or 3 days we will know the results of the local election. And for the first time, it's interesting that a nationalist party, Sinn Féin, has a chance to become the largest party, which then means that he would maybe call for a border poll. So that's what people on the other side, and maybe even some Catholics as well, according to what I found, might oppose and be afraid of. So, So with regard to unification, I already showed you this survey. This clearly reveals a diverse picture, although this is of course also from 2019. So it will be interesting to look at the way in which this might have changed today. Situational identification with particular places, people, pasts, and futures is also a central theme in my chapter in this edited volume. It is one of 3 chapters in the book that explores placemaking practices by people who arrived relatively recently in Northern Ireland. They remind us that those identifying themselves as Catholics or Protestants may be migrants, and that the population of Northern Ireland also includes Hindus, Muslims, Buddhists, and non-religious migrants. Many Poles living in Northern Ireland, for example, identify as Catholics, whose identity negotiations have been explored in a book by Marta Kempe, you can see on the right-hand side. Now, my own chapter in this book shows that the community label has been embraced by Northern Irish ethnic minority organizations, not only as part of diasporic politics, but also as an appropriation of local cross-community discourses that promote interaction and reconciliation between Northern Irish Catholics and Protestants. So it's very interesting if you see the way in which the community is claimed and constructed for different reasons. But in the case of cross-community projects that include migrants, the aim is often to fight racism and cultural bias. So diasporic placemaking practices do not, of course, occur in a territorial void. The Indian Community Center was founded in the late 1970s by Hindu migrants who arrived from the Punjab, searching for economic opportunities in the United Kingdom. As the number of Hindu Indian families in Northern Ireland increased, a need arose for a building that could be used for social and religious activities. And in 1981, you can see that here on the right-hand side, the Indian Migrant Organization bought Carlisle Methodist Memorial Church Hall. Its location, a major interface area between Catholic and Protestant populations. Now, 1981, that was the height of the Troubles. So for Protestants, it was no longer safe to visit the church. And the Indian migrants, in a way, they took advantage of the Troubles. And they transformed the building into a site of diasporic placemaking and Hindu worship when tensions eased, also, interestingly, for outreach activities that included Catholics and Protestants. So you can get here then the cross-community kind of discourse that then includes both diasporic communities, I use the word community here, and other communities, but in the sense that they would be using that kind of language. So the chapter zooms in on an outreach event that took place in 2011. Now, this is another one that I attended. So that is not that particular one, but this is another one. Interestingly, just look for yourself what's going on there. It's quite amusing. But so the outreach event in 2011 was organized by a group of first-generation elderly Indian migrants, the 50s plus group, that had invited 20 Protestant and Catholic senior citizens. The aim was to celebrate Diwali and promote the rights of the elderly. That was actually the main aim. To reach a wider audience, the temple space, which you can see here, was transformed into a performative setting in which common predicaments of elderly people in Northern Ireland were discussed in front of a camera. I have no time here to delve deep into the case, so let me just present a very brief snapshot that illustrates how the hosts performed and negotiated identity, turning the building into a place of commonality. So again, you see placemaking happens at many different levels. So this is within the Indian Community Center. The start of the celebration was marked when Chandra, an enthusiastic female spokesperson of the 50s plus group, opened the meeting, welcoming everyone to the event. Addressing the visitors in a familiar Northern Irish accent, she explained that Diwali was a festival of lights and that the Pandiji, a Hindu priest, she said, would first perform a short ritual for which a light had to be lit. Her translation of the word Pandiji exemplified how she used language to create understanding, finding expressions that were comprehensible to the guests. Chandra then asked one of the Indian ladies, Kalpa, to light the lamp on the altar, commenting that Kalpa happened to celebrate her birthday. As Kalpa lit the lamp, the Pandiji chanted in the microphone in Sanskrit and performed a brief puja ritual. For the Hindu participants, This was a familiar moment of sacred placemaking and an activity that tied them not only to the location, but also to each other and to the divine. It had a different effect on the Northern Irish guests, most of whom had never visited a Hindu temple and had little or no knowledge of Hindu philosophy. When I asked some of them later what they had made of the ritual, I got various responses from different through exotic to a bit like Catholic rituals. Whatever the perception, the action gained relevance through Chandra's reference to a birthday, which associated the lighting of the lamp with the lighting of a birthday candle on a cake. This was enhanced by the subsequent joint singing of Happy Birthday. Even the Pandit, whose English was limited and did not know the words that well, chanted the melody. The reframing of the ritual as a birthday celebration had the intended outcome. It broke the ice and lightened the mood. This effect was heightened when somebody called out, 21 again, an action that triggered much laughter and eye contact between hosts and visitors. The joke confirmed why they had gathered in the same location. All were visibly senior citizens, had to cope with aging, and wanted to protect the rights of the elderly in Northern Ireland. Being old, in other words, was a common denominator that in the particular space and time of the meeting defined their shared sociality. So cross-cutting all these community identities and creating some new common thing. So just very briefly to conclude, and I keep it brief, we have more time for a discussion. So to conclude, an approach that solely focuses, I got it there, thank you. An approach that solely focuses on sectarian conflict or top-down peace-building programs misses the significance of identity negotiations and performances of individuals like Lily and Chandra to placemaking processes in Northern Ireland. Ethnographic attention to detail, acknowledging not only the diversity of people, but also the diversity and change within them, helps sketch a more complex picture of subjectivity, multiple identification, and the intertwining of pathways as communities might be conceived and experienced, but also undermined in different ways. So this takes us then to the idea that we should really go beyond this two community paradigm. And I hope that, some of my arguments have made sense. So the very last picture here is then of how the book fits into a whole series. And this is all anthropology. And it's a book series that is called Material Mediations. What is focused on is relatedness of people, things, and places in many different ways, as you can see in different localities. But there are 3 books and 1 forthcoming that deal with Northern Ireland. So this is Brie Hocking, The Great Reimagining, book on public art, and then Death, Materiality, and Mediation by Barbara Graham. And then we have our book, and Kayla Rush has a forthcoming book about the art world in Northern Ireland, especially community art, which they call community, which is also interesting. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Maruška. Excellent presentation. I'm sure there's so many questions. I don't know where to start, but let me also use the opportunity to once again remind people who are joining us on Zoom. If you have a question for the speaker, please write your question in the Zoom function, and we'll be glad to pass it on later. But I would like to start the Q&A by inviting my colleague, Catherine, to come to the front and start with the first question, Catherine, for our speaker.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Maruška, for a really fascinating talk. I really love how you described so eloquently our standard ways of viewing Northern Ireland, both from a distance and actually in situ, and then went into this deeper, detailed view of the sophistication with which people actually understand themselves and the creativity that they bring to that self-understanding, especially in this hybrid Diwali session that you were describing at the end. So when you know, in some ways, this is about a contrast between paradigms, the political and the anthropological. And it really makes me wonder, though, if there is some possibility of some kind of hybrid view emerging from this, in which these cross-cultural ventures and processes of, you know, identification that you described so eloquently and observed so well could actually find an embodiment at a larger scale or at an official scale. That this, you know, I want to say, you would use the word complexify, which is not a word, but this is about inventing a new kind of mode of discourse about identity in Northern Ireland. And it seems too important to keep to the anthropological level. So I'm very curious about, you know, the sort of extrapolation that might be possible from this, or the sort of possibilities for, you know, sort of the symbolic function at a larger scale.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great question. And I think because I'm a big believer in interdisciplinarity, I think it's also an important one. And of course, we have to admit that there is interdisciplinarity. So I think it's not only anthropologists who take this sophisticated view. I think also within other disciplines, there's also an ethnographic fieldwork in a way also is more and more grabs people in other disciplines, which I know when teaching it and having students from different disciplines coming to learn about ethnographic fieldwork. Yeah, so one of the ways, of course, in which we can do this is through methodology. So for those of you studying political science or being political scientists, not just to interview the party leader, but maybe hang out with the party leader and go with them to the pub. But of course, it is a bit difficult because those people normally, they really perform identity. And in interviews, I think also there's very much a performance of identity that ties in with the political kind of or the politics that they represent and are supposed to represent. So yeah, I think that is maybe one way in which we could have a discussion. But I think also in political anthropology itself, people do not only talk with individuals who are not politicians, but they also actually do research going to political parties and their meetings and describing it from an anthropological perspective. So I think there is, all the potential there.
Maybe I have a next question for Maruška, and then we go to the Zoom. But the question that comes to my mind, Maruška, is you obviously have a Czech background, but you grew up in the Netherlands, right? And what you described, of course, reminded me also of the Netherlands, where once upon a time there were quite some tensions between Protestants and Catholics, and I even recall quite a famous Dutch saying about the mindset of the time when it came to marriages, right? Marriages between a Protestant and a Catholic. The saying that if two religions are in the same bed, the devil is sleeping in between them, so to speak. That this is not possible. And at the time, having such a marriage was a big deal in the Netherlands. But then gradually it became, a normal thing, and people would no longer consider it, special that someone with a Catholic background would marry someone with a Protestant background, and that then brings up my question: how is that in Northern Ireland? Is there any statistics on this, on mixed marriages between members of two communities? Is this increasing? Do you see an evolution there in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, thanks. It's also a great question that brings these big political issues, in the bed. And how can you get more intimate than that? So I appreciate that. Yes, so I don't have statistics here. But yeah, surely this happens more. What is interesting also about increasing migration to Northern Ireland, that there's also intermarriages there. Now, when I came to Northern Ireland, which is already 23 years ago, thinking that I would only stay a year, maybe 2 years. That was just a year after the agreement. I was shocked because I'm from the Netherlands. I lived in Amsterdam for a long time. So I was kind of shocked about two things. First of all, majority white people, which coming from Amsterdam is like a shock. So whenever I felt homesick, I would go to the Asian supermarket and feel at home. So interesting also about identity here. The second thing was they asked me to teach a module on kinship. And of course, the idea of marriage within the group, outside the group came up. So in some tutorials, I would ask students, but this is like 23 years ago, would you marry somebody from the other side? Now, already this was maybe a sensitive question because of the educational system. Pupils, they go to either a Catholic school or a Protestant school. There are some integrated schools as well, and some, say, Protestant schools, they would also have a more diverse population of students, but still, often the university is the first space where people come together. And people try to find out what's your background. Sometimes the name makes it clear, or where people live, of course, and so on. But interestingly, in response to my question, there was a discussion where numerous students said, I don't mind, I would fall in love with a Protestant if they were Catholic, or the other way around. But maybe it would be hard because my parents, my friends, where would I live, and so on. So clearly, there was an indication there. Yeah, this is, yeah, it is getting much more normal. I think also with people identifying as Northern Irish and maybe siding over issues such as same-sex marriage, for example, or abortion rights, which is all very recent in Northern Ireland, that has been allowed. And also ecology, the climate change is now, there's a movement of young people who don't care about any of these differences, and they'd find themselves maybe in ecological activism and fall in love. And yeah, who cares whether they're Catholic or Protestant as a background? So I hope this answered my question.
Excellent. Yeah. I suggest we go to the Zoom. And I think, Ray, we have a question there. So maybe you can select one or two and pass them on to me.
So one of our participants asked sort of two questions in one, but I think they touch very much on the last thing that you just mentioned, sort of people uniting around certain issues and putting the differences aside. So this participant asks, your key example is drawn from the experience of women. Is it possible that women have more opportunities for cross-cultural / cross-religious interaction than do men, thus promoting more tolerance and even friendship between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland? And the second part of this question was, again, talking about your opening statement. Your example is drawn from the death of a friend. This person's experience in Northern Ireland, where their father was born, is that religion can often become irrelevant in certain circumstances. The sickness and death of rural neighbors is one of those circumstances. So I'm wondering if you could comment on the gendered aspect of it, and then also for these circumstances where these identities are put aside.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, in terms of the volunteering that brought Lily close to, or how she got to know her Catholic friends, or people who became their friends. I think on the whole, that kind of sector draws more women than men. So I would assume that it might be so that for women there are in a way more opportunities, but I have not done any research on that. So I think it's a great question to push for further engagement there. But some of the other issues where people gather around similarities rather than differences are, of course, things like gender rights and LGBT plus kind of community where people come together. And there you could say, I don't think there would be more women than men involved in that at all. So Yeah, and then the ecology I think is also something that doesn't attract more men than women. So, but it makes me think. So, but issues like aging and death, coronavirus, of course, is also a big issue where people all over the world suddenly recognize, oh, we're actually quite similar because we are all vulnerable. We can all die. On the other hand, there were vast differences between migrants, often with jobs where they had to take many more risks. So there was a difference there as well. So I think also, the coronavirus and the pandemic is maybe one of the things that has pushed forward people coming together a bit more. And hopefully that will last.
Yeah. Maruška, before I go back to Catherine for maybe a follow-up question, let me ask some of the people in the room if there's any questions there. Friedemann, you can go first and then we get to No, go ahead, Friedemann. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this inspiring talk, both on a technological and an empirical level. I'm a historian, and I'd be curious about the role of memory or history arguments in the interactions you're studying. Because what I know from media discourse, these interactions are often underpinned by negative memories. So memories of experiences of violence overcome, so references to the troubles, to the Civil War. And I wonder whether in the fieldwork you have done, there were also ideas of positive memories underpinning these coming together, these overcoming these divisions. So if there are visions of a kind of shared Northern Irish or Irish history emerging that could underpin and in doing so legitimate these kinds of interactions beyond denominational borders.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, history.
Maruška, if you could briefly summarize the question before you answer, because people in Zoom may not be able to hear the question.
Okay. So it is really about the importance of history, and as I understand your question, and how memories of certain events, but I guess also constructions of past histories might help people to not be more violent, but see each other as to reconcile, for example. Again, it's a good question. What brings to mind actually is the opposite in a way with Lily. About Lily, I had a very positive story, of course, but it is also, I think it is important to acknowledge that she did speak about the elephant in the room, that there were certain things she could not discuss with her friends, because once this would come up, then there would be they would not be able to sit around the same table. So I think that's really important. And for example, she talked about one of her Catholic friends, about who she knows that this friend has relatives who were in the paramilitary. So that's a no-go zone. So I think that's important to show Lily's story, to bring it in more balance. I think as to past, what comes to mind is maybe the idea that about language and who actually owns or thrives by the Irish language. Of course, in the nationalist communities, the Irish language is an important kind of field within which politics are being played out, that Irish language needs to be supported and so on. But there's also some Protestants who identify with this Irish language. And indeed, one of my students, for example, did research some time ago on the Irish language and Protestants learning this language and coming together with Catholics and in one space where they learn to speak it and kind of see it as something that identifies them as people who can get along and should be able to get along.
So you mean Gaelic?
Yeah.
I saw there was another question from the audience.
Thank you very much for this very, very inspiring talk. It actually touched upon many things I encountered in my own research as well. I'm working on the Spanish Civil War, and we have a very clear two section narrative as well, two Spains. So encounter for Spain, and I'm guessing it's true for Ireland as well, or for Northern Ireland, that this narrative of the two sections has a very powerful political impact. It's important that it exists for people somehow, although it's stupid, in my opinion. If you start to deconstruct this identities of Catholic, Protestant, Britain, Irish, this has I would assume it would have an explosive dynamic, because it deconstructs a long-standing perpetrator-villain dichotomy. And that is something that I have realized as a German investigator working on Spain as something that I'm not allowed to question, or that I'm only very difficult allowed to question. People would confront me with skepticism if I go to their country and talk about the sources I found that clearly show that historical individuals did exactly what you described. They create their identities in the situations they find themselves in, and they do not run across these two section borderlines, but they mix things up, they merge things together, they transcend, but still at the same time they find themselves in one group, and sometimes they identify with, oh, they don't. So I wanted to ask you how you confront this dilemma, or what you make out of it.
Yes, so this is a question about the civil war in Spain, and the fact that people maybe they insist on these opposite identities, and if as a researcher you find it's more complex, that they resist. Yeah, I think this is exactly why we have to take this approach, on the one hand, to see identification as a process and always as a claim. So all identities are claims to similarity, which are always in a way non-existent, because we are not different individuals with our brains connected to one brain where we all really feel the same and really have the same thoughts. So it's always a construct. But on the other hand, you have to also take seriously and analyze the embodied experience of belonging and non-belonging. And there also comes in the fact that as individuals, we are all complex beings, and we are all full of conflicts ourselves. You only have to look really inside yourself, that, you have conflicting loyalties, and sometimes you think, oh, I should actually help this person out because, I don't know, kinship obligations. But on the other hand, I really want to go out drinking with my friend because I still owe this person, blah, 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 blah. So these inner conflicts, I think, need to be taken seriously. And only by looking at this dimension of the embodied experience, plus the discourse, the discursive practice of a community, you get to the complexity of that. Yeah.
Catherine, can I invite you for a follow-up question?
Yeah. So I'm even more intrigued and very tempted to think about creative interventions on the basis of what you've been describing. And so I'm really fascinated by, this idea of embodied belonging, which completely makes sense, especially in the north of Ireland, makes sense anywhere. In the context of Lily's love or desire to participate in the Orange Order marches, not because of, Protestant territorialism, but of the love of pageantry, really, and the sense of, belonging that would come with it, and, the beautiful wearing that beautiful outfit, that she found so beautiful. And it just makes me wonder about a new sense of embodied belonging that we all struggle with in terms of climate crisis. Mm-hmm. And if this could form the basis for a kind of experiential, shared experience of embodied belonging that would, take the form of marching. This is all speculative, but, I think that perhaps as an anthropologist and your interest in lived experience, it could possibly extend to imagining this kind of a new kind of practice that would give people another mode of identification that could run alongside all of the others that they're constructing themselves through.
Mm-hmm. So this is about embodied belonging and the idea of energizing that
Yeah.
to fight against climate change and all that. Well,
Yeah.
this is actually already happening, and also the use, as you say, of creativity.
Yeah.
In doing that is happening. One of our students, Neve Small, she does research on this. Exactly, she's from Northern Ireland. She's interested in this. She started off being interested in the in-between Protestant, Catholic, and she had various ways in researching that. And deciding on the Green Party and Extinction Rebellion and those kind of people who, of course, often during demonstrations, they use a lot of creative methods to express themselves, but also to claim a new future and identity. Again, you have to be careful because we can be very idealistic about this, and I think we have to. But even within these groups, you have competition, different loyalties, trying to get maybe the same money. As when you have three people together, one wants to be the leader. So I think, and it's interesting to look at both the ideal of the one shared thing, but then also to acknowledge that there is always a potential for infight and so on.
We go back to the people who are following us on Zoom, and maybe another question there. Right?
I also have my own question here.
Yeah. Why don't we do the Zoom question first, and then your own question after that?
So we have another question. This participant would like to ask about the people in the two quote-unquote communities who resist the more complex view that you described from your ethnographic research. Who are the people who insist upon a binary view, and what drives that sectarian engagement?
Mm-hmm. So this is about people being more on the extreme side of wanting to this binary or to pursue this binary kind of model in a way. Well, you have, of course, we still have paramilitaries. We also have, in the unionist side, for example, we get the Ulster Unionist Party, then the Democratic Unionist Party, who was maybe a bit more anti reconciliation, or not believing that the way forward was the agreement. And then we have the traditional Unionist Party, who are very much, like I think most Unionists, they really don't like this Brexit deal. So they, and we will find out soon enough on the 5th, whether other parties might want to really insist on a border poll and seeing what's going to happen there. Yeah, so it's quite complex. So to give one answer, you really have to go into the political sides and the different ideas also within unionism and Irish nationalism to find out. So I'm not a complete specialist here. I'm sorry for that.
Ray, why don't we conclude the session with your own question?
Yes. So this one is a very different sort of field. If I could ask more of a methodological question. So looking at the last slide that you presented, a series of books that the volume you worked on is a part of, sort of talking about placemaking, but also talking about objects within that. I'm wondering, what is the role of the non-human element in your work? For instance, talking about the building that got turned into an Indian community center. How do those sorts of things factor into this ethnographic research, especially when you're talking about these complex forms of identity making?
Okay, so that's a question about a non-human element, and I think you're particularly interested in the materiality of space and also maybe objects and so on. I'm very happy you asked the question because it takes me actually back to what I was before I discovered anthropology. So I was trained as an artist and went to art academy and painted and all that, and then discovered anthropology. So my first research was all on art in Ghana and Czechoslovakia, art and politics and so on. But it also sensitizes me to the importance of objects and not necessarily art, but artifacts in the creation of space and also in the creation of emplaced identities, because we cannot be and associate ourselves with anything without actually walking through a space and living to people and building an architecture and all that, and selectively using elements, curating, if you want, our environments. I think materiality is very important. There again, you have to take an approach where you look at the kind of, on the one hand, you have materiality, and then you have what I would call interpretability. So you have an object, but this object can always be interpreted in different ways. Now you cannot go beyond, in the sense, also its materiality as object, because a shoe is not a hat, but you can make a joke about a shoe and it becomes a hat, if you see what I mean. So I think that's where the creativity lies as well, in this process of identification. And also in these very tense environments, jokes are extremely important. So that's something I could write a whole paper about, I think. But thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maruška. We just heard the bells
Yes.
announcing that it's noon here in Berkeley, so we have to conclude our session. So let me conclude by thanking my colleague Catherine Finn for assisting me as co-moderator. But I'd also like to thank my colleague Ray Savard for arranging everything behind the scenes and for helping us with the questions on Zoom. Would like to thank the visiting scholars who attended today's event, people who followed us on Zoom and on YouTube, also live stream. But of course, the biggest thank you goes to Maruška Spasik for an interesting lecture and also wonderful Q&A we had after your presentation. So thank you so much. And thank you for coming all the way to Berkeley so that we can strengthen this partnership with your university in Belfast. Thank you so much.
Thanks for
Maruška.
having me, and we will have a great future together.
Yeah.